Was there ever a sadist putting razor blades in apples?
Satanic Panic, that was in the 80s, right?
Hollywood was late to the Halloween party. They released their horror movies never on Halloween. There's a lot of people who love Halloween who never connected it with horror. It kind of changed the face of Halloween.
I'm starting to feel like it's bigger than Christmas. This week, we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite holiday, Halloween. Now, being that Halloween is just right around the corner, I figured what better time to dig into where this holiday actually came from, because it wasn't always about ghouls, goblins, kids dressing up, throwing eggs at people's houses, and getting candy. Halloween at one point actually served an important purpose for the people who kind of got this whole thing started. So we're going to be sitting down with author Lesley Bannatyne, who has written numerous books on the history of Halloween, to dig into where this holiday came from, how it morphed into everybody wanting spirit Halloween trips in October, and where we think Halloween might be heading in the future. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Ghost City, the podcast. You know, Halloween's a big time for ghosts. It's a very popular time to be taking tours with us and stuff. But Halloween isn't about ghost tours, and I don't even know that it's really about ghosts. So we have Lesley on because I'm really curious to know, how did this all get started, and why did it become such a cultural phenomena where, you know, I actually just told Lesley before we got on, I'm starting to feel like it's bigger than Christmas. So how did we get here? So I guess we need to start with where this all started. Where did the idea of Halloween even come from?
Yeah. And for some people, I think it is bigger than Christmas, you know.
Yeah.
It just depends on who you are and what your aesthetics are and
Right.
who, you know, what you relate to. But how did it start? Well, you can go way back in history. You can go back a couple thousand years to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Northern Europe, where the year was divided between summer and winter. And the dividing point, that hinge, was November 1st. So that was called Samhain, or summer's end, because end of summer, beginning of winter. But because it was on the hinge of the year, and because you were going into the dark, dangerous season, it was kind of a time for otherworldly things to happen. Tribes would gather, they'd bring the flocks in from summer pasture to winter pasture. They would slaughter some, there would be a feast. It was kind of more like our Thanksgiving, in that you ate, you played games, you watched sports, you had competitions, you told tall tales. And then there was this other part of it where in the mythology, the mounds, the fairy mounds, would open and otherworldly creatures could come out. So it became known as this time where the world of the other world was very present. And that was the beginning. But we only know that because Irish monks wrote down the sagas, the stories they had been hearing, so that Ireland had this kind of pseudo history. So this is not, you know, nobody knew. It's prehistoric, this beginning. It comes from stories.
So really,
But
it was just a time of preparing for survival. Really, is what it kind
yeah,
of sounds like. You know, going into winter, you know, resources are going to be much more scarce. You're probably going to be depending on the other members of your tribe a little bit more than you do in the summer, and kind of bringing everybody together. So it sounded like it was really a cultural event, maybe.
yes, it was a really important time. And because it was an important time, and because everyone was together, and because you're going into the season where you couldn't see, you know, the darkness, it was also time for looking into the future and trying to figure out what's going to happen. Are we going to make it? You know, what's going to happen? Who's going to be attacking us? You know, will we survive? So it was a very interesting time, but that was a long time ago, with still a time to come together, right? Halloween, still a time to come together. But then when the Catholic Church took over and that religion spread throughout Northern Europe, there were two holidays put at that time of year. One was All Saints, which honored all the saints that didn't have their individual holiday, and that was November 1st, and All Souls, which was to honor the dead. That's November 2nd. And that's the link, you know, between the other world and the dead. All Souls Day kind of gives Halloween its juice for the rest of history. I mean, from, you know, the year 1000 to today, it's All Souls Day that is the stronger influence on Halloween.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned that, they had this idea that that's when these like kind of entities, you called them fairy mounds kind of open up, you said, and
Yeah,
like all these other creatures or entities, came out. Are you referring to things like ghosts, or like what did they think that was?
it was more not so much ghosts because well, in my mind, and this may be up for debate, ghosts are spirits of the dead. So it was more otherworldly creatures at first, monsters maybe, or fairies, or sometimes people who had gone before, or the dead, but it was the church that put the dead into that. Sorry, and ghosts. And so All Souls Day was to remember those who had gone before for lots of reasons. To pray for them, to get them from purgatory to heaven, giving us an interactive relationship with them, which became very important in Halloween, or to, ask them what's going to happen in the future. Like, where's the gold buried?
I want to know that question. I've never got a ghost to tell me where the gold's buried. Yeah,
No.
I yeah, they're kind of useless when it comes to that kind of stuff. Now, is that where the idea, and this is going to expose my ignorance here a little bit. Like, we're talking about Ireland, Scotland, all that kind of stuff. Like, are these otherworldly creatures? Is that where the idea of fairies and like, when I think of Ireland, I think of like leprechauns. Like,
Leprechauns.
is that where
Um,
those legends may have started as well?
not from Halloween, really, not from
Right.
Samhain.
Okay.
That's a much wider.
Totally different.
Yeah,
Tim, you
yeah,
have
it's
no
a much
idea what you're
wider
talking
thing.
about. Shut up. So at one point did I always think of, anytime I hear the church getting involved in something like Halloween, yeah, it always feels like, not that they ruin it, like it's almost like they want it to conform to like the religious aspect instead of this spirit, like the monsters and all this other stuff. Like, did the church play a role in making Halloween something other than what it was meant for?
I don't think so. Although I think you're totally right that that happens with a lot of church holidays. They were put on pagan holidays to kind of shift the emphasis towards Christianity. But in the case of Samhain, it's a little bit different because um, in those countries, in Ireland, say, for example, the Irish had no trouble adopting the church and keeping their belief in the superstitious world or the world of the other world. They have no trouble with those two things. So it was almost like the church put in Ireland, it was okay to put All Souls Day on November 2nd, so close to Samhain, because Samhain was an important day. It would be a day that they could remember. So it was more not the church trying to squash it or change it, but the church saying, hey, great, everybody's out at this time. This is a good time for All Souls Day. So those two things, even to this day, exist in Ireland, at least in the same place. I mean, there's all this Halloween folklore, and there's the church, and they're both really strong.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that the church kind of kept their hands off Halloween a little bit, I guess we could say. Well, I guess the next question is, and I know there's going to be a lot to this. So Halloween, as we know it today, started out as, a cultural experience where everybody gathered together. Like, in my head, I'm thinking like people dance around bonfires and eating lots of food. And like, I don't know that that's real or not, but that is not what Halloween is today. So where did that change start to take place, where it was originally meant for this, and now all of a sudden we get people dressing up as, Superman and mummies going around egging houses? I mean, at least
Yeah.
that's what I did as a kid.
Me
Getting,
too.
yeah. How did that is a major shift? How did that start to happen?
Well, it's a lot of centuries. So, the church becomes really important in medieval Europe, you know, pre United States, pre America, um, that we know of. And on those two holidays, those two church holidays, All Saints and All Souls, become really, really important. And there's a couple of things that translate to our contemporary Halloween, although it's not a direct line, but church holidays were charity holidays. They were a time where you could go out and beg from your neighbors and receive food and money. It happened on all the church holidays, not just All Hallows, which is November 1st, or All Souls Day, but all the Christmas, Easter. It was a time the rich would give to the poor. It was a time to kind of equal the playing field, time of generosity. So that idea carries through. But when Halloween came to this country, I mean, trick-or-treating was the last piece of it to fall into place and didn't until about 1940. So, the difference between 1500 in Europe and 20, the 20th century in America, there's a long line there. I think Halloween came to the United States, to early America, first in folklore, from people who knew it in Ireland and Scotland and had a lot of superstitions about it, or a lot of traditions about it. And they brought those over to the United States. But if I can go back just a second, Halloween, the secular holiday, separated from All Hallows, the religious holiday, around the 1500s, 1600s, definitely in Scotland, where you can start seeing literature that talks about the Night of the Witches, which is different from All Hallows. It's All Hallows Eve. And it becomes a time for people to gather together, tell ghost stories, look into the future, but it's definitely secular. And that's the Halloween that eventually came to America, because we still celebrate All Saints and All Souls. Everybody, many, many, many churches do. But Halloween, the secular holiday, came over in the folklore and the traditions of people who had celebrated it back in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England.
Well, the folklore stuff itself, I do know a little bit about it in some of the folklore, and that's some pretty interesting stuff. You mentioned the idea of it being like the Night of the Witch or whatever, but it wasn't just witches, right? They had folklore about all kinds of stuff, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Like, what were some of the more popular folklore stories that they would tell?
Well, it's fun. You can trace, at least say in Irish folklore, you can trace the path of the Irish to America and where they spread through the folklore. So, like, if you find in North Carolina, you'll find, if you stand at the crossroads at midnight, you can hear the future whispered in the wind. And then you find that same kind of belief as in Chicago, as you see the populations moving. So it's if you see an evil spirit in the American South, if you see an evil spirit, just fall on the ground, turn your pockets inside out, or stab a knife into the dirt, and that will keep this terrible spirit away from you. It's all those wonderful things. Earth, air, fire, and water. Look down a well at midnight on Halloween and you can see the face of your future spouse in the water reflected down below. Put a stone in the fire on Halloween night and see if the next morning, if it's popped out of the fire, which means you might live another year, or if it's still burning in there. Or a lot of things with food and how to predict your future spouse.
It seems like, and I could be mistaken, but a lot of folklore that we know of in the United States today originated with the Irish, the Scottish, and it kind of seems like they had a propensity for coming up with all these things, the folklore and the stories. Why do you think, or do you even agree that, the Irish and the Scottish seem to drive a lot of these stories? And if so, like, why would they do that? Why did that mean so much more to them as opposed to maybe people that lived in Spain? Not saying Spain doesn't have folklore or anything, but what about the Irish and the Scottish made them want to do that?
Well, that's where Halloween came from. So they were the ones to make this night special and to have folklore surrounding it, which they'd had for generations and generations. But it's interesting you bring this up, because when they came here, there are a gazillion different cultures in this country. So the folklore gets really interesting. So when you mix up, folklore from Africa, say, with folklore from Ireland, you get this really potent kind of stories. Like both cultures have superstitions about black cats, right? So what you find here in some of the Southern folklore is, the black cat bone is a magic bone, and on Halloween. And so this is like folklore from different places, but they put it on Halloween. On Halloween, if you take a black cat bone, and I won't discuss how you get that, and you run it through your teeth on Halloween, you can make yourself invisible and you can go rob a bank or do whatever you want. So there's a lot of magic that gets mixed up together once all these people come together and are in our, you know, the original colonies and then beyond.
Well, I know you've also, you know, done, you know, research into folklore and kind of, you know, why these things happen. So when you say something like that, you know, take a bone from a black cat through your teeth, you become invisible. Obviously, that's not really happening. You know,
No.
and I think as we sit here in, you know, 2025 or 2025, there's a lot of people that think, well, they believed that back then because they were stupid or because they didn't understand how things work. And that wasn't the case at all. These weren't stupid people. But why would a culture come up with this idea that you could, you know, for using that as an example, I could take a bone from a black cat, run it through my teeth, and I become invisible? Like, why wouldn't that be a situation where somebody says that and the other person says, no, you're crazy, you're not going to become invisible, and it just stops there? Why do these stories latch on to our culture and become part of who we are?
I think it's entertainment. I
Right?
think it's titillating.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's exciting just for the moment. I mean, it's why we still tell ghost stories. You know,
Right.
we,
Thank God we tell ghost stories, by the way. Otherwise, we would not be here talking right now.
yeah. I mean, it's a way to pass on stories. It's a way to, it's a, sometimes they're warnings, and I'm sure you know this. It's sometimes it's teaching you how to live, you know. Um, and we love the surrealism of them. We love the magic. And so you listen raptly. It's like, really? You can do this? Okay. But you're not going to go out and get a black cat bone and try it.
Well,
But
I
there's a
imagine
lot
there's
of,
some that did.
well, yeah, yes. But, you know, it's exciting to think that that's possible.
Yeah.
And I think stories do that to us. It's just opening up the world in a different way.
You know, there's a part of me that thinks, you know, and I know the guys behind the cameras are getting tired of hearing me talk about this, but I've been talking about consciousness a lot lately in podcasts, and how, you know, I think that consciousness might be more than what we think it is. And one of the central themes about that is like an intention, like to perform an act like with intention. And there has been some studies that have been done that shows when large groups of people get behind something like with an intention, that you can almost influence reality, if that makes any sense, or influence, you know, that's why, you know, prayer, whether you think it's a religious thing or it's not, there has been studies that show that when people pray, you know, about wanting somebody to get better or whatever, a lot of times they do. Like, do you think that some of these rituals came out of that idea of bringing people together and putting thought behind something with intent to hopefully influence their crops or how the winter goes, or and maybe that I even did influence the intent and how things go, and it just kind of became that, but somehow we ended up with cat bones in our mouth. You know,
I think originally, yes. Say in Scotland, Ireland, when food was critical and farms and crops were critical, there was a lot of Halloween mishigas going on about preserving your crop or making sure the harvest was not going to be frostbitten. And so these rituals kind of, yes, they get people on the same page, thinking the same thing, wanting the same thing. And it's like how you feel about luck. You know, if you don't do it, you worry.
right?
You
Yeah,
know, and if you do it, there's no harm.
right.
So they were born of that. As time went on, they became more entertainment as far as Halloween goes. They were more entertainment. You know, finding out who you were going to marry was wishful thinking. You know, you peel an apple in one peel and throw it over your shoulder, and it falls in the initial of a G because you see a G because you like a Gary rather than a Charles. You know, it's a G, not a
But
C.
that almost reminds me of one from back home. You know, the part of Pennsylvania I grew up in, you know, we're right in the middle of Appalachia, and Appalachia is this whole other animal when it comes to folklore and stuff. So I think I've heard that, the apple one, throw an apple thing over your mouth. I want to say maybe I fell for it at one point.
It's fun.
Yeah, that's how I met my wife, actually.
Yeah.
It was a Honeycrisp apple, thankfully, and not a Granny Smith or a Red Delicious. I had a joke in mind, but it's still too early in the morning. I can't put it all together. But Well, you talked about like the early 20th century, as far as like, that's when Halloween started to become more of what it is today, unless I misunderstood you. Like, so how did that start? It seems like in the early 20th century, everything kind of revolved around World War I or World War II, kind of like as a catalyst to inspire these cultural changes. People just needed a distraction from all that stuff that was going on. Maybe it's possible Halloween kind of took off because of something like that.
It kind of followed along with popular culture and what was happening. So you're right in that the wars had a lot to do with it, but in a different way. We had Halloween parties starting after the American Civil War. Halloween came here for a number of reasons, or became popular for a number of reasons. It existed before then in folklore and in tiny pockets, but it was after the Civil War that Americans, and I'm sure you know this and your listeners do, got really interested in ghosts. And here was this holiday that had a lot to do with the dead returning and spirits in the other world. So that became very attractive. It also was a time where printed magazines and newspapers exploded, and they were all looking for content. And they found this, information about this quaint holiday from Northwestern Europe, and the Victorians loved it. They're like, yes, yes, a rural holiday. We need to go back to where things were more true and more
Yeah,
real.
they seem to like the more macabre,
And
darker
they
stuff.
like ghosts.
Yep.
Yes. They read, they liked ghosts, and they loved exotic things. And to the Victorians, Highland Scotland was as exotic as Fiji or Borneo. And so here was this little holiday that was rural, loved that. And so they started throwing these Halloween parties where they picked them really out of magazines, like this is how you do it. And they picked up Halloween there. But in the 20th century, with this influx of immigrants that we had at that time, there was an effort to put everybody on the same page, and holidays were one of the ways to do it. So in the early 20th century, Halloween was one of those holidays, and they would have townwide parades and townwide parties, and everybody's doing it, adults and kids. And it was kind of a way of saying, this is what we do on this day, and you do that on different holidays. So it brought everybody together in a way, and it was a way to teach people this is what we do here. And it just grew out of that. As you talked about World War I, yes, that had an effect on Halloween. Um, but it was after World War II that the holiday really exploded, because after World War II, there were all these babies and there was the birth of the suburbs, and Halloween became definitely something that children would be more involved with than adults. It was kind of given over to children after World War II.
It almost feels like, and I obviously was not alive back then, but it almost felt like it was a way for society to have something for the kids to feel good about, because,
Yes.
A lot of people don't understand that, in the 30s and 40s, life was very difficult for everybody, but that really impacted the children in a way that, not a lot of people understand today. So maybe that was like society's way of saying, hey kids, like, here's something that you can go do and have fun, and you don't have
Yes.
to think of you don't have to worry about, dad died in the war or any of the other bad stuff,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Yes. And it was also a way, throwing parties for kids and the beginning of trick or treat and all that was also a way to keep kids at night from doing all the things that they
Right.
were doing before that time,
Right.
which actually became known in the 30s as the Halloween problem, soaping, greasing trolley tracks, and I mean, well, exploding pipe bombs in churches or painting the principal's house black. I mean, there was stuff that was going on back then that the town mothers and fathers might have thought, there's a better way to do this.
Yeah, let's
And
refocus their energy
yes, yes,
into,
yes.
not blowing up principals' houses and like all this other stuff. I'm not sure that still
Yeah.
happens. I've never blown up a house, or I actually
No,
blow a
no.
pipe bomb or paint the house. But yeah, I remember
Yeah.
on Halloween we used to, I think the time has passed where I cannot be legally prosecuted for this. But yeah, we would go egg the principal's house and the teachers' houses, and all kind of nefarious teenager activity.
Yes.
At one point, I thought I invented this. I was very disappointed. It was Halloween. My mom had a whole lot of those little white plastic forks, and we had thousands of them, and we crawled around my superintendent's yard on Halloween night and stuck all these in the yard, which sounds stupid until you put yourself in that position. You wake up in the morning and there's 10,000 plastic forks all stuck through your yard. You're like, what the hell? But then I found just recently they call it forking, and other people do it. And I'm like, man, I thought I invented that 30 years
I've
ago.
never heard of that.
But it's so stupid, but it's funny at the same time. So
It is funny.
so I could see why parents would want to redirect their kids' energy into that.
Yeah.
But it couldn't have happened just for that reason. Like, we need to distract our kids from their petty crimes. Therefore, we're going to try to build Halloween into something else. I'm sure there were other triggers that helped turn Halloween into what we know it as today.
There were. I mean, what's interesting about that, I mean, Halloween was for everybody in the early 20th century, whole families, whole towns, and then the wars and vandalism and trying to fix that, and then emphasis on kids. It became just all about kids. And then just a short amount of time later, adults came back into the celebration of Halloween. I mean, it was really a very tiny golden age where it was just for children, say from the 40s to the 70s. And a lot of people remembered that, I think. And I think nostalgia was a big draw that brought adults back into it. People who loved trick-or-treating and running around in the dark without any supervision were not going to give that up as adults. And so it became, again, in the 70s, for a number of reasons, an adult holiday as well as a kid's holiday.
Yeah. Well, so, but why? You know what I mean? Like, this is such a strange little holiday. I understand, the folklore and everything behind it, but now today we have, spirit Halloween stores that pop up like magical ghosts around Halloween all across the country. I don't have many friends right now. Actually, if I'm being honest, I don't know if I have any friends. I just work and, talk to people like you. But I do remember, especially living back in Pennsylvania, you would go to people's houses and it started out like they would just put a couple, put the pumpkin on the front porch, right?
Right.
But now you go and these people are going all out. Like, you walk into their house and it's like a haunted house, like, to some degree. And now you have yard decorations, as big inflatable Santas, except for now we have big inflatable witches and ghosts and stuff. Like, it really is this whole other thing than even it was that I remember when I was a kid growing up in the 80s. And
Right.
And I, as somebody who likes to think I know a little bit about culture and how these things impact people, it just, I still sometimes have a problem making the connection. Like, how did it just get so big?
Okay. There's a couple of reasons,
Right.
and a lot of them have to do with money.
Of course, of course.
But in the 70s, with John Carpenter's movie Halloween, it was the first movie. I mean, Hollywood was late to the Halloween party. They released their horror movies never on Halloween. Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day, Christmas. But John Carpenter's Halloween was released on Halloween. It was called Halloween. It was set on Halloween, and it used that pumpkin as a sign of evil, right? And so there are a lot of fans of horror in our country, but they had never connected Halloween with that. And there's a lot of people who love Halloween who never connected it with horror. So when that movie came out, it kind of changed the face of Halloween, and adults and teenagers thought, oh my gosh, we can celebrate Halloween. This is our holiday. This is it. The whole holiday became more popular and more bloody. So then you've got people interested in recreating the movies, and that's where you get into the yard decorations. I mean, a lot of this started in California around LA with set designers who did these amazing things in their front yards. And then the internet just coming in and listservs where people would find each other. And, I know how to make a skeleton out of pool noodles up in Seattle. And I know how to make really cheap fake blood down in Delaware. And they were getting together and sharing do-it-yourself stuff. And so the first yard decorations by adults were usually homemade. So, witches that flew on clotheslines and, you know, legs that came out of the ground on windshield wiper motors, for Halloween. There were a lot of really wonderful creative things. So American marketing takes a look at that and corporations and they say, hey, we can do
We
this.
can make a lot of money
And
here. Yeah.
yeah, we, we can do this a lot cheaper. So that's when you start seeing Halloween departments and Halloween stores that come up seasonally selling all this stuff. More people can buy it. It's cheaper. More
Mhm.
people bring it home. More people decorate. More trick-or-treaters come. And the whole holiday gets kind of a boost.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, it's absolutely taken on a life of its own. For
Yeah.
us here at Ghost City Tours, actually, believe it or not, Halloween isn't our busiest time of the year. It's actually July. I think it's just simple.
Really?
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's Halloween night, especially this year on a Friday. We'll probably run 25,000 people on just Friday night alone across all of our markets. But July, it's because that's when everybody's traveling. I think that's
Yeah.
that's what the thing is for
Yeah.
us.
Interesting.
Well, so as much as we celebrate Halloween and have fun with Halloween, there's still that group of people who want nothing to do with Halloween, and it's usually and by the way, I'm not knocking anybody at all, but it's normally the church, right? Like there people still want to associate Halloween with evilness or just bad in general. I was actually watching the Waltons the other night. I don't know if you remember the Waltons.
Yeah, I do.
And don't ask why a 45-year-old man's still watching the Waltons every other night. It's wholesome. I miss my family. I want to be a part of a big family like that. And the grandma on the show, the Halloween came up at one point, and that's evil. You can't be taking part in that. Why do you think that the and I don't want to just blanketly say the church, but
Right.
you understand what I'm saying. Why do you think
Yeah.
that there are still people or entities or organizations that are against Halloween even now?
Um, I think that it's less now than it was maybe 20 years ago when it was really something that you read about all the time. I think that it's just a matter of image and images. You see an image of fire or a devil or a skeleton, and depending on what you believe and what you think, you see that as an image of hell. So it's mistaking images of I don't know, popular culture with images of hell. And that's not something that you can live with. It's it's really just iconography. It's just the pictures. There's nothing inherently evil in Halloween. People will say there is, but that's really not true. Just like there really wasn't a satanic panic. And
Actually, Paul asked me and he just stepped out of the room. He was like, "Make sure you ask her about satanic panic." I got
yeah,
whatever his
yeah,
fascination with that is. Um, but well, satanic panic that was in the 80s, right? That was
right.
when that kind of was like that same time where people started talking about people poisoning the candy and putting razor blades in apples. And it must seem like a marketing tactic to get people to want nothing to do with Halloween. You know,
Well, there was just this very general, what it is it's a fear of each other. It's a fear of strangers, right? At bottom, that's what it is. So was there ever a sadist putting razor blades in apple braid? I'm sorry. Was there ever a sadist putting razor blades in apples? No, there wasn't. It's the myth of a stranger doing this to, hurt children or to poison them. Yes, you can find one or two instances of bad stuff that happened on Halloween, but it's mostly between family members, which is awful, or people who knew each other. The rest of it gets inflated because it seems like it could be true. It's what they call an urban myth. It seems like it could be true. It's got all the earmarks of something that could be true, but it's just not. And you can't convince people otherwise because it somehow in themselves they have a fear that this could happen. So this is a dangerous place. We really need to be afraid of strangers. And there was all that stranger danger that came around that time. We were worried about our children for serious reasons, and it kind of went into the Halloweenosphere as let's be afraid of crazy people on Halloween.
I remember
And
being a young kid, and I remember I was still living in Ohio, so I had to be at least 8 or younger. That we would go, do our trick or treating, and we'd come back home, and then my parents would make us go to the fire station to have our candy inspected. And like I would just remember like, no, we want to eat it now. You know, 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever.
yeah,
We want to eat. No, we have to take it to the fire station so that they can inspect our candy. And I don't even know what inspecting the candy was, but
they were taking your Snickers.
yeah, seriously. But looking back on it was ridiculous. And it almost feels like, where are we at today? Like when it comes to that type of stuff, like don't trust people. I mean, we have,
Right.
I'm certainly not going to dive into politics or anything, but we're an extremely divided, society right now. And it seems like, at some point there was a switch, that we went from a society that, and I know I'm going to romanticize it a little bit, but like going back to the Waltons, for example, that goofy TV show, like everybody loved each other. The communities pulled together. Like you didn't have that fearful behavior, until a commie came into town anyways,
Right.
of, you got to distrust your neighbor. Everybody was very trusting or a lot
Right.
more trusting than they are today. And something happened to society as a whole that, has been pushing us more and more down this path where don't trust anybody.
Don't trust it. Yeah.
Like
Yes.
even trick or treating, I have 2 kids and they're grown now, but even when, I was raising them and they were about that age, 2008, 2010, when they'd have been that age when I remember going trick or treating as a kid, we were going alone. I wouldn't even think of letting my kids go alone nowadays. And I don't think there's any reasonable reason to do that. I mean, I don't think we're a more violent society. I don't think that, there's more bad people out there. It's just the way society shifted, as to how
Right.
we view
And
people.
and you've internalized it.
Yeah.
We all have. We
Hmm.
all have. And you can see Halloween change. I mean, you will let your kids trick or treat alone, but also you create because Halloween is always creative and it kind of always goes from the bottom to the top. People make it for each other. You see neighborhoods closing their streets and making Halloween neighborhoods so that, you can let your kids be on the street all together and all the houses are decorated. And so you kind of enclose the experience for your kids so they can have something of what you had as a kid,
Yeah.
which is what you're after, right?
Yeah.
You want them to have that fun.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. Like, looking back, like I said, I'm 45 now. It's been a long time since I, did any of the Halloween stuff. But, some of my fondest memories as a child was, what do I want to be for Halloween? Going through that process. And, I grew up in a family where, we didn't really have a lot, so I couldn't go buy the fancy costumes. So we ended up making a lot of costumes. I remember my son, his first costume. I didn't have any money. I was just a broke 22-year-old kid, and I took a brown paper bag and glued cotton balls all over it. And then I put 2 socks on a headband, glued cotton balls on that, and he was a sheep. And then the trick or treating, walking around with them and seeing them, experience their neighborhood and their neighbors. It's such an important part of childhood. I mean, it was for me anyways. And I don't want, I wish it didn't turn into this thing, what it is today, where it's, you have to be afraid of everybody and everything. And,
Right.
Johnny,
But you have agency, right?
yeah,
So you can make that neighborhood party and you can let your it does bring communities together. The
yeah,
communities are just smaller
right.
and
And that's
and
okay.
everybody knows everybody.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the future of Halloween is? Like, where do you see this holiday heading in the future? We've talked about how today it's different than it was, in the 80s. In the 80s, it was different than the 40s. Like, if you had to guess, where do you think Halloween is, what role do you think Halloween is going to play in our society in another 30, 40 years?
That's a great question. Here's the thing about Halloween, because it doesn't celebrate a person or an event or anything really. It can ride along the cultural current and kind of express what's happening with us. So in 50 years, if we all become sheep farmers again, on the hillside,
Which I'm not opposed
um,
to, by the way.
Halloween will be about protecting the flock. If it depends on who we become in 50 years, and I really can't see that far ahead because things are happening so quickly. I mean, I'm looking now as like, how does AI change Halloween? I have no idea yet. I have to figure that out, but
Right.
it will go with us. It will express what we're caring about and what we value and what we're afraid of. That's what it does. It expresses things.
Well, it expresses things and it also attracts things,
Yes.
including you. So how, what was it that happened in your life? Because I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you've written a number of books on Halloween, the history of Halloween and folklore and all this stuff. Like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not a topic that most people would be like, you know what? I think I want to become, almost like a scholar on Halloween. How did that happen for you?
Like everything else, you back into it. Um, I was a writer. I wrote for newspapers and magazines. A friend of mine was a literary agent, and she said, "Hey, Les, there is a publishing house in New York that's looking for American histories of Halloween. They want to do a whole series. If you wrote a proposal, I bet I could sell it." And she said, "There's two holidays left, Halloween and Election Day."
I see why
So
you picked Halloween.
And yeah, it was not the easy choice because there was much less information on Halloween than there is on Election Day. So it took me 3 years to write the first book, and I learned a lot in writing that, not just about Halloween, but about writing a book. And that one came out, and then that was like the rabbit hole. It's like, this isn't just a holiday. This is a cultural event. This is church history. This is spiritual stuff. This is religion. This is contemporary witchcraft. This is vegetables. This is a whole wide swath of information. And I didn't even scratch the surface. So I kept going.
More
And
books and more books.
yeah, yeah,
Well, so what do you do to celebrate Halloween? You've mentioned that you're in Boston right now, and
yeah,
when I think of Halloween, I think of Salem. Like
yeah,
every year I tell myself, next year I'm going to try to make it to Salem for Halloween, and then I delay by a month, and I'll do that
yeah,
again this year too. I'll think about it again in December, and then I'm like, hey, we should really go to Salem next year. Just I know it's a madhouse, but I feel like it's something you should experience. But it's by December you can't even get a hotel room, like for the next year, and
yeah,
it's insane.
yeah.
So have you ever been to Salem for Halloween, or what do you do to celebrate Halloween,
Yeah.
if anything?
Um, to get to Salem on Halloween is requires, years of planning. But I'm lucky. I live 30 minutes away. So I go to Salem every October. But if you go early in the month, you get the same experience, but without the lines and the people and the traffic and the no parking. So it's Salem is an incredibly gorgeous town, and its Halloween vibe is wonderful. And so I have been there. Sometimes events are held earlier in the month, which is great. So, say, for example, I could go to the Witches' Ball the week before, no problem. And that's a wonderful thing. So, there's a lot of things you can do in Salem before the actual Halloween night. I've never been there on Halloween night because I'm home giving out candy to the kids in my neighborhood. And then I try to go to as many places as I can that night to kind of take it in and witness it. I love it. I love going to Beacon Hill in Boston because the houses are decorated like you would not believe, and the streets are thronged with kids, and it's just a wonderful feeling. But the week before Halloween, I always love to hit a couple of haunted attractions
Oh
and
yeah, like haunted
events and
houses,
things like that.
like the haunted house with the guy with the chainsaw, like chasing you, or
There are so many chainsaws, but
oh god, yeah.
there there are also so many brilliant, creative walk-through haunts that are astonishing. The crime is that you're being chased through them and you just don't have a chance to look at everything. So one of my favorite Halloween memories was November 1st. It had snowed on Halloween, and November 1st, I just went up to a place in New Hampshire called Haunted Overload, and there was snow on the ground, and there was no one there, including the people that ran it, but it was okay. And I walked through the haunt, you know, the morning after Halloween. It was quiet, it was cold, it was absolutely gorgeous to see all the things in the daylight. And, it's just an amazing amount of work that people put into that. And they're so creative.
Oh yeah, there's a haunted house here in New Orleans. What is it called? I don't remember. I'm going to get it wrong. But I used to know the guys that ran that.
House of Shock?
No,
But it's called something else now?
no, it's the one near the cemeteries, the morgue.
Oh, okay.
It actually used to be an old funeral home and a lot of other stuff. I mean, those guys, Halloween, obviously, October 31st, they start planning. So he told me after Halloween, they'll take 2 months off and then the work begins. He's like, first of the year, we have to start getting ready. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I understand that there's a lot of things going on here, but it really takes you 10 months to get ready. And he's like, yeah, like it is a lot of work. And you're right. It's funny you mentioned that. I didn't think of that way. When you're being chased by a guy with a fake chainsaw, you don't really get to appreciate the intricate details that they put into those things.
Yeah. And they put so much into them.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it's a competition now. It's almost like everybody wants to have the scariest haunted house in America. Me, I'm just like, I just want to stay home. I'm not going to a haunted house. Did you celebrate Halloween when you were a child?
I did love Halloween. I really did. And it was the without parents Halloween, and we were allowed to go out as long as we wanted to, until we were exhausted, and then it was just so exciting to run around the streets with a bunch of other kids in the dark. It was so exciting, and I loved it, and I looked forward to it for months and months and months. And I was sad when it was over, but Christmas was coming, so it was okay.
You had something to look forward to. Now, did you guys celebrate Halloween as a family, or is it more like, the parents were like, you guys go do your own thing?
They very much, yeah, you guys do your own thing. But my dad made our costumes, and he was really great. And it was my brother and myself. And so we were, a pack of cards. We were a couple of dice. We were
I noticed a trend there.
One miserable Halloween, he made us Antony and Cleopatra, and he had me wheeling my brother in a wheelbarrow around, which I found really kind of inhibiting.
Right? Yeah. Well, I mean, you did have a bigger place to deposit the candy, I would guess. But
yeah, there was that.
yeah, I think I quit dressing up for Halloween. I was 12. I think I was 12. I had dressed up as a clown. And, I'm not a makeup artist. I was 12 years old. I remember getting made fun of to the point where it literally damaged me for life. I'm like, I am never dressing up for Halloween again. I haven't dressed up for Halloween since I was 12. My wife, she keeps trying to convince me, like, oh, you need to dress up this year. She's very bubbly. She owns a dance studio. So she's one of those, loves people paying attention to her. Me, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this. One year I put a fedora on and just said I was a gangster. So that was the closest thing I had to a Halloween costume. Do you have children?
Yes.
And so what was Halloween like for them growing up, in your household?
Well, of course, I have a daughter, just one daughter. And she pretty much found it horrifying.
Right.
And it took her a long time to trick or treat by herself, like maybe until she was in middle school. She wouldn't go up the steps. We had to go up the steps and like point back and say, so, not a super Halloween fan. And it wasn't because the house was filled with skeletons or anything like that. She was a shy girl, and nope, this was not her thing. When she was a teenager and had friends, then it was her thing.
Oh, of course. You got to have a reason to go out with your friends.
Yeah.
And the other thing I noticed, I'm looking behind you, and I guess you're at your home.
Yeah.
I don't see that you're getting ready for Halloween. I would think that somebody who has written all these books about Halloween would already be kind of getting ready for the season.
I have a granddaughter now that comes here 2 days a week, and she's not a fan of skeletons. So I keep it on the down low until the week before, and then this place will explode. Right.
I'm sure that's a hell of a time to be around. All right, everybody, where are the skeletons? Where's the cauldron?
Really? I have a whole drawer full of spiders. And I had a friend whose son was afraid of spiders, and she's like, can you just empty the drawer just in case? Just take the drawer of spiders away. Like, well, yes, I can do that. I can do that.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. There's stuff everywhere. It's just hidden.
Right. Well, I think we about covered everything. I think that, we gave a little bit of insight, to the people listening about where Halloween came from. I think for me, it's kind of funny. It started as like a community event almost, this idea of like, hey, we're getting ready to go into winter. We should all gather together
Yes.
and, make sure that we have what we need. Pray for the future, hope for the future, whatever wording that you want to use. And over the years, it's almost like Halloween has kind of come back to that in a way, right?
That,
Like, or
yes.
at least maybe Halloween, like Halloween, if it is its own spirit, it's trying to get back to bringing communities together and, showing that, in this case, you don't got to be afraid of everybody. Community is there to support you and help you. And maybe we need to remember what Halloween was originally meant to do in that sense.
Yes. Come together, tell stories. Still doing that, right? And what I love that we've added to it is all the creativity, all the incredible costumes and houses and decorations and everything makes it a creative holiday as well as a community holiday.
For me, it's almost like, like if you're a Jungian, like studied him, like the Carl Jung, the psychologist, he always talks about everybody has a shadow. Everybody has like, not a, when I say darkness, a lot of people think I mean like evilness inside them, but everybody has that shadow, that part of them that they're able to repress. And I think for a lot of people, Halloween gives them that ability to like let that all out and embrace, their shadow self, that part of them that might secretly be addicted to horror movies, but they don't want to admit it in the workplace. Or,
Yes.
Halloween gives you that ability to pull that part out of you and have fun with it.
Absolutely. It's an exhibitionist holiday. It's like a time, if there's one day a year where you're going to be something other or something bigger than yourself, this is the day to do it. And if you're too shy to do that, you can do it under a mask. It's like an amazingly freeing thing to be able to dress up in a costume as someone you're not or someone you think you are that other people don't know about.
Yeah. And they take it through. Have you ever been to New Orleans for Halloween?
Not for Halloween. Oh gosh, I love New Orleans.
Oh my goodness. And I mean this in the best way possible. It's a freak show. It's, there's not a lot of families bringing their kids to the French Quarter for Halloween. And if they do, they need to rethink their life choices. So it's essentially, a couple blocks of people, the French Quarter just packed with every costume, or in some cases, lack of costume that you could possibly imagine in New Orleans. It's a good time. So if you ever do get a chance to, an opportunity to come down to New Orleans for Halloween, I would invite you down. It's definitely different than any other Halloween I've experienced.
I would love that.
And then in return, I'm going to come up to Salem. One of these times, I just want to do it. I got to be up there for, sometime in October.
Come to Boston and I'll put you on the train. That's the only way to get there.
I could definitely use assistance getting into Salem. Well, so if people wanted to learn more about the history of Halloween, because we just barely scratched the surface here, you have written a number of books on Halloween, and where would they be able? I mean, almost I feel so dumbass saying this anymore. Where could they find you? Everybody's going to go to Amazon anyways.
Right.
But
you can go there.
Yeah. Aside from Amazon, if people wanted to learn more about you or what you're doing, do you have a website or anywhere people can follow you?
Yes. And there's a number of articles in there. If you don't want to read the whole book, you can read the articles and you're free to take them and use them as you like. And that is, hurry.
You're okay.
And that is iskullhalloween.com. So ISKULL Halloween.com. Like I love New York, but I skull Halloween.
Oh, I thought it was like iPhone. I'm like, what are you doing with that skull? iPhone, skeleton, or skull. No, that's great. If people were going to pick up just one of your books, and hopefully they'll pick up more than one, but if they had to pick one, what is your favorite?
The book you're working on is always the favorite. So I would say my most recent is the most favorite, but that is it's called Halloween Nation: Behind the Scenes of America's Fright Night. And for that book, I spent 3 years just talking to people who lived, made Halloween and why. Why? Why is it so important to them? So that's more of a popular culture book about what it is now and how it came to be that and who does it. But for the history, for going back history, it would be Halloween, an American Holiday, and American History. That book is now over 30 years old.
All right. Well, Lesley, I really do appreciate you joining us this morning. I don't want to take up too much of your day. I know it's Friday. You're probably gearing up for the weekend, and
Yeah.
but I really do appreciate you stopping by, and hopefully, people will become interested in the history of Halloween. Honestly, the history of Halloween is so much more interesting to me than what it is today. Just to see where this all came from, and learn about the folklore and the legends and all that, and how it helped contribute, or at least get the ball rolling into what we have today. So
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here.
yeah, of course, anytime. Like maybe next year we'll do it again before Halloween, and we'll figure out a new way to talk about Halloween and get people excited.
All right.
Not that they really need our help to get excited, but you know what I mean. All right, Lesley. Well, once again, I really do appreciate you joining me on our little podcast here, and I hope that you have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Ghost City Tours, your guide to the haunted side of history in over 25 cities nationwide. From restless spirits to unsolved mysteries, our tours bring the dead back to life. Book now for a haunted city near you at ghostcitytours.com.